Welcome to Empowered to Grow, the podcast. I am your host, Hanan Al-Basha. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Empowered to Grow in Business live podcast. This is your host, Hanan Al-Basha. I'm very excited to have you here today. And today, if you've seen the episode or what it's supposed to be, we are supposed to be talking about today. It's about numbers and more importantly, demystifying financial myths. And I'm not going to be talking about that myself today. I have a very special guest who when I first met, she's like, I love numbers and I would love to support people to stop shying away from them. And that for me was the hook. And of course, when we had a follow-up conversation, I'm like, I've got to have you on the podcast. So today's guest is Apurva Chitnis. Thank you so much for being here today, Apurva.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, for having me, and thank you for the warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. You're the whiz on numbers, and I know you don't shy away from them. But can you please introduce yourself and just tell us about you a bit more?
Sure, no, absolutely. I'd love to. So I'm the investment director for Miyasa Partners. Miyasa Partners is an investment firm based out of the ADGM. We focus on developing institutional quality access strategies for both in the public and private markets, sort of for the Middle East, Africa, and Southern Asia region. Aside from my corporate role, I serve as an advisor and mentor to a few startups and SMEs in the region. My background has been in the financial services industry for about 18 odd years now. So, sort of a veteran in the industry. Started my career in the US with a hedge fund and have had various sort of finance, operational, and investment roles, over the years. And prior to Miyasa Partners, I worked with Safanad, a private equity firm based in Dubai and New York for about 8 years. So that's me.
I love that. As I said, you're a person who doesn't shy away from numbers. Let's start at the basic. What is it about numbers that scares us a little bit, or is like, because I had this with a client of mine when I'm like, let's look at the initial financials. I don't go into the deep end of the financials. I'm just looking at your revenues, your expenses, projected revenues, those kinds of things. Like, no, I don't want to look at the numbers. And I'm like, how are you going to be in business if you don't want to familiarize yourself with numbers? What are you seeing from your end?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I have a definitive answer of what specifically scares people, and I'm not sure why that is the case. But I think it's a combination of investors also throwing out sort of financial ratios at people.
Yep.
What's my IRR on this investment going to be, and what sort of ROE can I expect? And I think in the absence of not knowing what those acronyms stand for, I think that's sort of the financial technical jargon perhaps scares people, and quite frankly, it really shouldn't. We investors like to throw fancy terms out there just to sound smart and intelligent.
What's your EBITDA, or what's your MRR, and tell me about these. I think for a lot of people starting out, they're like, I don't know what they are, or I can't even project them from myself.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's just trying to step away from the jargon that people like to use and just try and understand the numbers as you would want to understand, let's say, your own sort of, your personal health, for example. And this is just trying to understand your business's financial health. That's how I see it.
I love that. And speaking of that, and our episode's called Demystifying today. And this is something I'm very passionate about. I love to think of myself as a kind of a catalyst for humanizing strategy for people. Let's humanize some of the numbers. If we are looking, because what we're saying now starts with the financial literacy. So let's start with some of the basics. What are the basics? Whether you're just starting out in business, or you're been in it a while and now you're looking at scaling and kind of expanding and internationalizing and all of this, what are some of the basic numbers you should be looking at?
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe if we can perhaps just take a step back, right, and ask ourselves the question about what is financial literacy and why is it important,
Love
right?
that.
And at its very core, I think financial literacy is really about the ability to understand and manage various aspects of the financial processes and financial matters, and understanding those effectively, right? So now, in the context of entrepreneurs, for example, there's sort of three components to financial literacy. So the first is sort of the art of, call it, budgeting and financial planning and forecasting. Um,
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs, they operate in a highly sort of dynamic, fast-paced, challenging environment, right? And it's always been the case, but if you look now, particularly as valuations have declined and corrected, global IPO market has slowed down, and investors are just sort of on the sidelines and hesitant to provide sort of subsequent rounds of financing. Cash is drying up, and as a result, businesses are struggling. So as an entrepreneur, you need to really be adept at sort of managing, building, and adhering to budgets
Yeah.
that serve as a financial roadmap effectively, right?
Yeah.
To sound, prudent capital allocation decisions. And it kind of goes beyond just tracking your income and expenses. It's really about being able to forecast your future financial needs, and like I said, building that map. So that's, I think, the first component is the budgeting and the FP&A process, if you like. The second aspect is really around financial statements literacy, right? And this is where it's about understanding how the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow statements all come together, and how
Yeah.
they integrate, how they talk to each other, and how they come together. Oftentimes you'll have people think about financial statements in the context of just the income statement and the balance sheet, but it's oftentimes the cash flow statement that reveals a lot about a business's short-term financial
Yeah.
health. So that's the other aspect of sort of the financial literacy, and
And
then
and that essence in the middle is basically how much are you spending, how much are you getting out of the business, but also when we talk about the cash flow, you could do sales, but you don't get the cash in right away. So you have to look at when you're getting the cash to be able to understand the cash flow.
exactly right. The
Yeah.
sort of the inventory turnover cycle, your AR AP cycles, etc. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and then the third aspect is sort of the working capital management effectively, and then the third aspect is sort of the investment literacy, if you like, and
Yeah.
that's kind of understanding, well, what's my business worth? How do I value it?
Yeah.
Fundraising concepts. The different types of financial instruments that are out there that investors will rely on to invest in your company. Term sheets and legal structures, and I guess all the financial jargon that I promised you I wouldn't talk
Has
about
to
today.
come in. That has to come in now.
But I think it's about these three components and having a solid foundation around these three components that
Yeah.
provides for financial literacy and will set you and your business up for success, really.
Yeah.
So that's what financial literacy is. Why it's important, obviously, as I sort of just alluded to my comments earlier, is it sort of leads into your ability to understand the health of your business,
Yes.
in terms of not just kind of looking at the financial statements, but being actually able to identify trends in financial ratios, visibility around your cash flow patterns,
Yeah.
margin, gross margins, EBITDA margins, those sorts of things, such that you can then make better informed business decisions. And then coming up with your revenue strategies, looking at expansion opportunities, investment opportunities, what sort of financing options are available to you, so you make better informed decisions on the back of this data, right? So that's why
Yeah.
we do this.
Yeah.
um, of course, it's to build investor confidence. That's, as your business evolves, that's clearly going to be an important aspect. um, so those are the reasons why we do it. And the point is that I think financial literacy is important at every stage of your business, right? And
That's
as
true.
your business evolves from being an early stage business to, you got MVP, you're now generating revenues, you're probably getting to break even, you're starting to look for external funding, you're growing, you're EBITDA positive, and now you're looking for an exit. As your entrepreneurial journey evolves along those along that pathway, the financial complexities of your business evolve as well, and that's why it's important to build that roadmap early on.
Yeah. But as you said, it starts with the basis. And that basis is important because even before getting to the part about getting other people involved in your business and external, whether investors or funding or whatever, you want to know how healthy your business is. Are you actually able, or are you going to be able to afford to hire another person? Are you going to be able to, kind of rent out or lease out this space? Are you going to be able to pay the suppliers on time? And these numbers, you can't shy away from them. You can't ignore them. You
Yeah.
have to understand, what are you looking at? And it also, that part about trends is also really important that you said, because I remember one of the first businesses I went into was a fine foods retail concept. It was a franchise we got out of the UK. And it was amazing. I loved it. And in terms of numbers and revenues, it was doing great. But then you look at the back end, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
hang on a second, it's not doing that great. We're getting the revenues, but they're not translating into profits.
Yeah.
And I always had to do a lot of analysis into our supply chain cost, what are our best selling items, how do we order, the ordering process, but as you said as well, the cash flow.
Yeah.
And it proved very difficult when you don't have, whether you yourself, you're not the finance person or you don't have a financial team. So for those that don't have the support system,
Yeah.
what would they be looking for, even if they're like external support? Who would
Yeah.
they be looking to help them understand or look at those numbers differently?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, look, I think, as I said, finance is something that, is important to incorporate into any business early on, right? And the requirements are very different if you're an early stage investor or early stage company to sort of
Yeah,
a late stage mature company, right? That said, when you're at an early stage, it's great to know about valuations and those sorts of things, but that's not necessarily relevant to you. What you really
yeah,
need to focus on and hone in on is just two or three very basic concepts, right? And at that stage, it's really about, because you as a founder are sort of laser focused on building your product, right? And as you should be obsessed
yeah,
with your product, and that's what you care about, getting something out there in the market that people care about. But from a financial perspective, what's really important is your burn rate. I mean, that's the primary indicator, or I guess metric that early stage investor founders need to be focused on in terms of, how long is their cash
explain.
flow.
Yeah, I was just about to say, explain the burn rate a little bit before we go into it.
Yeah. So burn rate is how quickly, effectively, you're burning the initial cash that you contributed into your business, right? And said another way, it's sort of your cash runway period, i.e., how long is the cash that you put into your business going to last you? And that's very important because founders oftentimes, when they're at that stage, sort of pre MVP and pre revenues, are bootstrapping their company, right? So,
Yeah,
and these are very critical sort of metrics to understand relative to their own lifestyle, because clearly that money is coming out of their personal savings.
yeah,
So it's important to know how quickly you're burning cash, because that's when you make decisions on, what sort of budget do I have for marketing, let's say, how
yeah,
much can I afford to spend on marketing, and should I be using that capital differently to maybe, more prudently to perhaps develop my product better rather
yeah.
than hire
Put in the
a
product development rather than hire, and yeah, all the other decisions that you need to invest in.
Exactly. So I'd say, what sorts of things you need to look at are obviously very different depending on what stage you're at in your
Yeah,
entrepreneurial journey. But starting out, I think the single most important factor is sort of your burn rate, and your cash runway period. I think back in the day, I'm talking about back in my day, we were very limited to kind of the content that we had, just books, right?
yeah,
Today, I think we are fortunate that we've got access to so much content that's across not just books, but, podcasts and LinkedIn and social
yeah.
media and all that. So, I think
And ChatGPT. So we have that as well.
yeah, to an extent, yes, for sure. So I think, we should rely on all of these tools, right? I don't think it's just one or the other. You've got opportunities to network around. You've got peers and mentors that you should lean in on.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people that are starting out to hone in on some of these tools that are out there at their disposal, and quite frankly are free and easy to access, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things we certainly hear founders, early stage founders, say is that, well, I'm too focused on building my product. I don't have time for finance right now, and well, there are all of these tools available, and quite frankly, just learning some of these basic concepts early on will go a long way in your financial strategy.
But that's actually one of the myths. So talking about kind of demystifying some of the financial myths. And I remember, we were together on a panel with Incubate in Dubai, and it was an amazing discussion. And I remember like one of the myths, because I get this a lot as well, when they're in the early stage founders and they're like, I need to get an investor or else my product will not come to life. And
Mm,
it's kind of finding an investor right from the start. And especially that sometimes they're not even, again, because we're looking at the financial literacy, they might not be looking for an angel investor. They're looking immediately at the VC. And I'm like,
mm,
that's not the right stage for it.
yeah.
So let's look at that. Kind of analyze, how do you bootstrap, or what is the most effective way to bootstrap if you want to bring your product to life?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? And I think bootstrapping is a very personal sort of decision. How long you do it, how much you do it. It also obviously is do you have co-founders with you, and are they willing to contribute actual capital as opposed to sort of just sweat equity? So I think
Yeah.
these are all the considerations that come in, right? But I think as a general rule of thumb, what if I were on my own entrepreneurial journey, I would try and bootstrap for as long as I can. Oftentimes what you find is that early stage founders try and reach out to VCs too soon, and
Yeah.
late stage growth companies try to IPO too soon. And these
Mm,
are some of the things that you tend to find. And
yeah.
you have to be ready for each of these stages, right? And I
Yeah.
think the jump from being an early stage sort of founder to actually being ready for an investor, there's a lot that goes behind that, right? And you're suddenly going to be accountable to an external investor who's got their set of LPs that they need to provide returns to. So of course they're going to ask you the tough questions about IRR and ROE and financial readiness and those sorts of things. And suddenly you'll find that you're kind of caught up in the deep end, and you're not really ready for all of that, right? So I think the jump from being from bootstrapping to just straight up reaching to a VC investor is not necessarily the right approach.
Yeah.
There are alternative mechanisms to sourcing capital. You have a lot of SME financing that you can get these days. These days at attractive sort of yields. I mean, yes, it's a tough market. Don't get me wrong,
Mm.
but there are programs that back SMEs. So you don't necessarily have to jump straight into equity with a VC founder or with a VC investor.
Let's another kind of confusion, I think, or somewhere that's a bit ambiguous. Let's clarify. Now we're moving from bootstrapping, and we're looking. You said there could be the traditional methods, whether we're looking at funds or grants or loans or something like that. That's all non-equity. But then we have the FFF, friends, families, and fanatics. I like to think of them. And then we have the angel investors, and then we have the VCs before, kind of the real scaling, which is where you go IPO and everything else. When would you advise to use which group, or at which phase of the business would you move on from one to the other?
Yeah, look, I think, when you're sort of in your ideation phase, you're building, trying to establish product market fit. Clearly, you want to try and, keep your capital, you want to keep your company bootstrapped as much as you can. I tend to think of friends and family almost as bootstrapping to an extent.
Yeah.
It's not seed capital, it's not angel capital, but it's more sort of an extension of your own capital.
Mhm.
So until you've established product market fit, and you feel confident in being able to generate revenues, I wouldn't necessarily reach out to third party investors. That's just sort of, to me, I think that sets you up for in a sense failure,
Yeah.
because you're now suddenly accountable to third party investors who will demand a lot out of you, while you have not established product market fit. And that's just a lot of stress you take on yourself, which I don't think is necessarily the right approach.
Okay. And then beyond that, you've passed the ideation, you've passed the validation,
Yeah.
you have the MVP out. Is that a good time to, and you've got some traction, you've got some revenues, and kind of the ball is rolling. Let's call it. It's not the snowball yet, but there's the essence of it is rolling. That's where we can start looking at angel investors.
Absolutely. That's when you start looking at angel investors. And again, I think it's very important that you articulate why you're raising the funds, so that the sources and uses of capital, right? And I think I had mentioned this in one of the previous discussions that we had, that it's not just about saying, well, I need $1 million for product development, right? It's being
Yeah.
able to show what that product development is going to do for your business. Is it going to help you generate X more customers? What does that translate into revenues? How much more revenues is that going to bring you? Are you going to start and be able to start a new vertical as a result of that product development? So you need to be
Mhm.
able to actually quantify those things, in terms of, how that capital is going to be used, beyond just saying, well, we're going to hire a marketing team, or we're going to invest in our product. Tell us what that is going to do in terms of the revenues effectively.
Yeah. And then the VC comes in at the end where you're getting not necessarily the maturity, but
Yeah.
you have a lot more to showcase because their demands would be a lot different than angel investors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you of course you have VCs that invest in early stage companies, and all of that. But at that point, they're obviously backing a founder, they're backing a vision, they're backing a
Yeah.
strategy, and at the very least, you need to be able to show that that has been validated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to be at an inflection point or break even or any of that sort, because VCs take asymmetrical bets, so that's what they do. That's their business.
Yeah.
So they're not private equity where they're looking for EBITDA positive companies and those sorts of things. So necessarily, so I think it's being able to show and demonstrate that you've got you validated your idea beyond just a hypothesis. You're actually sort of generating revenues, and you're growing revenues. I think that's sort of the point where you need to start reaching out to bigger investors.
Okay. One elephant in the room I need to address.
Hmm.
Cap tables.
Yes.
It is the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
How how familiar should we be with our cap table, or is it really that much of a priority? Because a cap table is in essence everyone who's invested in your business, right?
Mhm.
That's the
Mhm.
bottom line of it. And I know that sometimes who you get to invest and have them on the cap table is important to bring in others. And there's sometimes you put someone on the cap table and others don't want to come in. Cap table for entrepreneurs. How can they be their friends and their allies?
Yeah, yeah. No, again, excellent question, right? And I think something that people talk about a lot. Look, I think it's sort of a dilemma, or it's a balancing act, almost, between the need for capital versus finding the right investor, right?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes, and like I said, the environment that we are in right now, I think, step back actually. So, what we're seeing since sort of the end of 2022, 2023 is this whole concept, especially with the tech startups, of unsustainable growth, growth at any cost. That sort of model
Yeah.
is now turning around, where it's sort of prudent capital allocation, growth at a sustainable rate. Those are the things that are becoming more and more important and visible, right,
Yeah.
and coming to the fore. So as a result, like what you would see before was, anyone that's willing to write a check, regardless of the quality of that check, entrepreneurs would sign on. Whereas now, I think there's a lot more thoughtful process in, yes, because I think investors also are being prudent about who they allocate capital to, and so that's actually leading to healthy discussions between founders and investors about what value can you bring to my company aside from just providing uh,
The
aside from just
investor
providing
bet.
capital.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a very important discussion to be had, right? Because I think when you look at some of your early investors, what you're looking for is not necessarily, post the seed round, is not just capital, but it's also access to relationships, access to
Yeah.
markets, those sorts of things. So you're almost looking for a strategic investor in a sense, who is providing the capital, but is also providing all of these channels to grow your business.
Okay. So one last question related to investments and funding and everything. We know that when a founder first starts, he's got 100% of zero value. And then by the end, what are the numbers he should be looking kind of, to get a good, I don't want to say a good fit, but kind of a balanced thing working towards, because we know that a lot of them, looking for the investment at the beginning, they want to give up a lot of equity just because that's the $50,000, that's $100,000, checks and stuff. by the end of it, what are they looking for? What's a percentage, a healthy percentage for the founder to give up or to maintain?
Oh, look, I mean, I think as a founder, as go through through various fundraisers, obviously you're going to get diluted, and
Yeah.
that's a given. But you want to look at retaining anywhere between 10 to 15%. Of course, if it ends up being $1 billion company, even having 3% of that is worth a lot more than having 100% of nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But yeah, I mean, you kind of want to end up, at as you're reaching exit, to be anywhere between 10 to 12% of the company that you have.
I love that. Okay. So thank you. That has been so helpful. And I know we didn't approach kind of all the abbreviations and all the initials.
That was by design, wasn't it? You told me in the beginning, don't talk about any of the things. I was like, okay.
No, I wanted this, and as we said, when we want to familiarize ourselves with some of the concepts, sometimes just delving into the deep end. This is not a discussion for investors. We don't want people at that end. We want people to just feel friendly with the numbers, so they're not freaking out. Um, oh my God, I forgot my line of thought. The last question I end with. The show is called Empowered to Grow. And now this season is all about being empowered to grow in business. How does this phrase resonate with you, Apurva? Empowered
No,
to grow.
no, absolutely. I think that's sort of the mission for this sort of decade, isn't it? Right. And I think it's empowering people and empowering entrepreneurs, empowering women, to really explore what sits with their values, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I wanted to touch upon and we didn't actually talk about is when we talk about financial literacy in the context of businesses, right? Be it startups, be it SMEs, whatever. I think there needs to be this open communication around financial, call it health or whatever of a business, right? And
Yeah.
and if you're a founder that's sort of leading a team, it needs to really come top down, and the culture is so important in terms of being transparent about the company's financial goals, so that
Yeah.
people feel trusted and they feel this sense of shared responsibility, and that's where you feel empowered and therefore accountable to, because there's this concept, right? Like, well, finance is not really for me, it's for the finance department, and it's not really, right? It's for all the departments of the organization. So
That's true.
no, I think it's something that resonates really well. I think it's like I said, I think empowerment is sort of financial empowerment. I think is very important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Apurva. This has been really useful and helpful, and I hope a lot of people get the essence of it. I'm sure we're going to have follow-up conversations, just talking more numbers, and maybe we will have an episode just for all the abbreviations.
Forward to
Thank
that.
you so much. I appreciate your time. And to everyone who joined us, thank you. We hope that you got a lot of value from today's discussion. And as always, I wish you love, abundance, and prosperity. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Empowered to Grow podcast. I'll catch you on the next episode. And until then, know that empowered you empowers others. Love, abundance, and prosperity to you all.